The Haram love. This is a romantic tale of an unacceptable or a forbidden love affair resulting from racist motives between a free white Sudanese Arab girl and a black African Negro boy from South Sudan. It was written in English and translated into Arabic by Dr. A. Ahmed. Copyrights. All rights are reserved. No part of this book may be reproduced, stored in a tribal system, or transmitted in any form or by any means without the prior written permission of the author, except by a reviewer who may cite brief passages from the review for printing in a general magazine, a school journal, or a university article. All characters in this love story are fictitious, and any resemblance to real people, living or dead, is purely coincidental. Chapter 54. The two lovers whose marriage was legally annulled meet again. The Indian girl Emily's plane arrived at Heathrow International Airport in London at noon. She came from Bombay. She carries on her shoulder her 1-year-old son, Dan Jr., and a small handbag. As she exited the crowded arrivals hall, she placed her son and her handbag on a wheelbarrow. Then she went to the prepaid taxi office and hired a cab. She gave the driver the hospital address and sat quietly with her son in the back seat. Emily is very tired from her long 8-hour flight. Her heart and mind are occupied with different mix of feelings and thoughts. She feels very sad about being separated from the most honorable and dearest souls she had ever met in her miserable life. At the same time, her heart longs for the dearest lover she has ever had in her sad life. She couldn't believe that she was walking in the real world. Yesterday, she lost hope in life. She thought she would lose her only son, her beloved Indian family, and her dear African husband. Today, everything has been miraculously restored through divine intervention and the love of the Indian Christian Matthew family did it. On her way, Emily asked the taxi driver to stop at a gift shop so she could buy a bouquet of flowers for her hospitalized husband, who was bedridden in a big health facilities in London. When the taxi driver drove her off in front of the hospital, Emily's heart began to beat rapidly. She was sweating and shaking, her voice wavering and her speech slurring as she inquired about Deng's room with the receptionist. The British receptionist politely asked, "Can you show me your ID card or any official government-issued document with your photo?" Emily placed her son in a chair, the bouquet on a table, and took her Indian passport out of her handbag. She handed the passport to the British receptionist with trembling hands. The British girl picked up the phone and dialed the room number. Then she said in a very friendly tone, "Mrs. Nasir, you have a visiting girl. She's a young Indian woman. Her name is Emily Matthew. She said she came to see your sick son, Deng Majok Nasir. Okay, I will send her to you." Then the beautiful British girl looked at the Indian beauty, Emily, and said with a smile, "Mrs. Ababa Nasir and her son Deng Majok Nasir are ready to receive you. Follow this corridor and you will see room number 17 on your right. You won't miss it." Then the Indian girl Emily Matthew thanked the English receptionist and started walking down the long corridor until she saw room 17. On the door was written in large letters, "Mr. Deng Majok Nasir." Before she pressed the bell, Emily had a strong feeling of uneasy. Her heart beats rapidly inside her chest. Then she hugged her son and kissed him warmly to calm her feelings. She reached out and pressed the bell. She heard a woman's voice calling her in. Then Emily gently pushed the door open and entered. The mother, Mrs. Ababa Nasir, had never seen her Arab daughter-in-law or her grandson before. Despite this, her intelligent mind was able to penetrate her grandson's face to see a slight resemblance to her son. Denk's mother is an Abyssinian from Ethiopia, but his father is a Sudanese African from the Denka tribe in South Sudan. The baby has a mixture of an African father, an Arab mother, and a Ethiopian grandmother. So Mrs. Ababa Nasir's eyes widened and she focused her gaze on Emily's face. If she had seen the devil himself standing before her naked eyes with his horns on his head, perhaps she would not have been so afraid. In response, she jumped out of her chair as if a poisonous Indian cobra had appeared in front of her and screamed as if she saw the angel of death who had emerged from the abyss of death to deprive her of her beloved son, Deng, once again. "Who are you?" the frightened mother-in-law, Ababa Nasir, screamed angrily. "I am Deng's Arab wife," Emily replied fearfully. "Get out of here! You killed my son once, and today you came back to kill him again?" The sick son, Deng, woke up from his nap and saw that his Ethiopian mother was arguing with one of the British nurses. When he saw Emily and her child, he opened his eyes wide enough to assure himself that he had never had a dream about his beloved Arab wife in South and the fruit of their eternal love, Deng Jr. Mrs. Nasir shouted again, "I told you to get out of here before I call hospital security and ask them to expel you." Her loud voice frightened Emily's son and made him scream. When Insaf did not leave, the angry Abyssinian mother used her mobile phone and called the security office and reported the unwanted intruder. It took some time for the African husband's mind to overcome the great surprise of seeing his beloved Arab wife after such a long separation and his dear son Deng Jr. for the first time. When his mind regained its normal state and began to work, he saw two security guards rushing into the room. They took control of Emily and her son and began taking them out. The little boy screamed louder. The disabled son Deng shouted, "My wife in South! My husband Deng!" Emily answered. "Guards!" Mrs. Nasir shouted. "You must expel this accursed Arab woman and her child from here. She is deadly. She killed my disabled son before, and now she has returned to destroy his life again." The African husband Deng repeated at the top of his voice, "Insaf, come back." The sight of the two security guards pushing and bullying Emily and her son out of the room filled Deng's chest with indescribable righteous anger. So he pushed his body off the bed and fell to the floor. He started it, crawling towards his wife and their son. The two security guards let go of Emily's hands and hurried to rescue the disabled patient and return him to the bed. His Arab wife, Emily, reached him in front of them, fell on his body and embraced him. Her African husband, Deng, hugged her and embraced his son, Deng Jr., and began to cry. The Ethiopian mother, Mrs. Ababa Nasir, ran to Emily, grabbed her long hair, and started it, pulling it up. The baby son, Deng Jr., fell from the hands of his mother in South, while his grandmother, Mrs. Nasir, was pulling her hair painfully. Her disabled son, Deng, somehow managed to stand up and hold his mother's leg. The Arab wife was able to free her hair from the grip of her Abyssinian mother-in-law and held her crying child again. Mrs. Ababa Nasir grabbed her Arab daughter-in-law inside by the waist and started it, pulling her away. Her disabled son then shouted angrily, "Mom, you should take your hands off my wife." The mother, Abba Nasir, answered angrily, "She's not your wife. She killed you before. Insaf is my wife, and she has a noble spirit than anyone I have ever known." When the son uttered these words, his mother summoned what was left of her strength and forcibly separated Emily from him. Deng's hands grabbed the bed, and he forced himself to his feet with great pain and difficulty. With trembling legs, the disabled African husband stepped forward and walked towards his Arab wife and their son. When he reached his beloved wife Insaf, his lips found her lips, and they began to kiss each other. Chapter 55. Adverse reactions of Mrs. Ababa Nasir. As soon as the African husband embraced and kissed his beloved Arab wife, he collapsed to the ground. He tried to get back on his feet, but his physical strength failed him. His wife, Emily, leaned over his body and tried to lift him up. The two guards who went to rescue him intercepted her attempt. Then they lifted the disabled patient Deng and put him back on his bed. At that time, Mrs. Ababa Nasir had quickly left the room and, with great anger, headed towards the hospital receptionist. When she arrived at the reception room, she pressed her lips together and her eyes burned with anger. Her teeth clenched together as she began to force the words out of her mouth and enact her angry revenge on the young British miss who had supposedly given her false information. Mrs. Ababa Nasir shouted at the top of her voice, "How dare you give me wrong information about the girl who came to see my sick son, Deng?" The British receptionist girl looked at the angry foreign woman for a few seconds before answering her question. "I did not give you any false information. The girl I sent to your room proved her identity to me by showing me her foreign passport. Firstly, she is not an Indian girl, and the girl who came to my son's room is a Sudanese girl. Secondly, she doesn't have a Christian name, but you told me her name is Emily Matthew. That is her name, and she proved it to me with her Indian passport. Her name is Insaf, and her father's name is Salah Al-Junaid. If what you said is true, then the girl I sent to you holds another girl's foreign passport. That girl is a criminal and a fraud. She must be arrested immediately and handed over to the London police." The British receptionist looked seriously at the Cuban mother, Mrs. Ababa Nasir. When she realized that the angry foreign woman was serious about her complaint, she picked up her receiver and called the hospital security number. "Hello, sir. We have a complaint about a visiting girl." The woman who filed the complaint said that the girl who came to see her sick son, Deng Majok Nazir, had a fake passport. Yes, she is still in the hospital. She is most likely in room number 17. According to the complainant, the intrusive visitor is a Sudanese Muslim girl known as Insaf Salah, but she claimed to be an Indian Christian girl named Emily Matthew. "Well, sir, we are waiting for you. Thank you, sir." Once the security officer with his guards and the English receptionist entered, the disabled patient's room, they saw Emily and her son sitting next to Deng on the same bed. The Abyssinian mother, Ababa Nasir, remained behind and tried to make a phone call to report the matter to the British police. However, as a woman visiting from Sudan, she does not know which phone number to call. She doesn't even know the police 911 number. Therefore, she abandoned the idea and hurried to her son's room. Meanwhile, the security officer looked at the Sudanese family for some time before informing them of the complaint. "Excuse me, ma'am, we have a complaint against you." The English officer continued his conversation with the Indian visitor Emily. "Can you come with me to the security office?" Her African husband then intervened, saying, "Who filed the complaint against my Arab wife in South? Your mother, Mrs. Ababa Nasir, has informed us that this girl is not Indian. She said that she's a Sudanese girl and her real name is Insaf Salah, but she has an Indian passport bearing the name Emily Matthew." Then the African husband turned his face to his Arab wife and demanded an explanation. His wife Insaf bowed her head and remained silent, which confirmed the report of the complaint of his mother and the receptionist. Her beautiful eyes revealed her fear and anxiety. Her husband then tried to solve the mystery before his wife Insaf ran into legal trouble with the security officer. He said protectively, "Sir, this is my beloved wife Emily, and this is our son Deng Jr. But according to your mother, she is not an Indian girl, nor is her name Emily Matthew. My mother does not know that my wife obtained Indian citizenship while living in Bombay. Due to some personal problems, she changed her religion from Islam to Christianity. She also changed her first and last name." While her African husband then tries to justify the dual identity of his Arab wife in South, his angry Abyssinian mother enters the room and hears his last words. "She is lying to my son," Mrs. Ababa Nasir shouted it. "She's a Muslim by birth and cannot change her nationality and religion during this short stay in India. She is faking someone else's identity." The security officer said, "Okay, we should investigate this matter at the security office. Would you please come out of this room, Mrs. Emily, and follow me?" Her husband then shouted angrily, "No, my wife and staff will not leave this room, and no one can force her to go to your office." The British receptionist said to the patient then, "Sir, you have referred to this girl by her name in South twice. This leads us to believe that she is not Emily. Your mother has the right to complain about her, and the security officer must interrogate her." Deng shouted it, "My wife and staff will not go from here. In that case, we have to take her against your will, Mr. Deng," the security officer said. "You cannot do this to my wife. She has more right to visit me than anyone present here." The receptionist replied, "We do not object to her visiting you, but she had to come in the right way." Mrs. Ababa Nasir shouted it, "This Arab girl was never a right or a good woman. Wherever she goes, she puts people in trouble. She was the main cause of my son's illness, and because of her, he became disabled and moved around in a wheelchair. Also, because of this Arab girl, my only African son was shot in the chest by the Khartoum police, and the Sharia court flogged him 100 lashes until it damaged his spine and left him paralyzed. Moreover, this same girl has killed many people in Sudan. She killed her infant son on the day he was born and threw his remains in a creek. She also killed her first Muslim husband, Hattaha, on their first wedding night. Furthermore, she stabbed to death her companion in in a brothel, and that murdered prostitute was called Rabadriya. They were both prostitutes, so she killed her, stole her money and jewelry, escaped from her stabbed body, and hid. In addition to these heinous crimes, she killed a bim named Hajjashaza. That second murdered woman is a Sudanese prostitute who linked her up with a wealthy old Saudi man, where this girl took off her clothes in front of him and committed adultery with him. The Abyssinian mother, Mrs. Ababa Nasir, concluded her criminal report on her alleged Arab criminal daughter-in-law in Sab by saying, "Therefore, for the safety of my only son Deng, I cannot allow her to stay for a single hour with him alone." The British receptionist responded in wonder, "Oh my God, such a young, beautiful woman has committed all these terrible crimes. She has done more than these heinous crimes. She is also a filthy whore and a notorious thief. She stole money and jewelry from her two former lovers, the wealthy Arab Muslim boy Samir Wad Maz'ud and the Coptic Christian boy William Girgis Hanna." The African husband then shouted it, "Mother, you have no right to accuse my Arab wife in Saf of crimes she did not commit. You know that the criminal court in Khartoum had acquitted her of those false accusations. As for the case of the evil Sudanese Bim woman, Hajjashaza, who tried to force her to sleep with a wealthy old Saudi man and a corrupt Sudanese police officer, my chaste and honorable Arab wife in Saf killed her in self-defense from kidnapping and sexual blackmail and to preserve her honor, chastity, and virginity." Mrs. Ababa Nasir angrily shouted at the security officer, "Sir, British officer, if you allow this criminal girl to stay here and something bad happens to my son, I will sue the hospital authority." The officer said to Emily, "Ma'am, if you don't leave this room and come with me to my office, I will take you by force." The African husband Deng put his hands around his Arab wife in Saf and their son Deng Jr. and hugged them tightly to his chest. Then the English security officer stepped forward, took the visiting Indian Emily Matthew by the hand, and began to drag her from the bed. The other two security guards joined their post and took out the Indian girl and took her away from her husband. The disabled African father continued to detain his small son, Deng Jr. Then Deng shouted it, "Don't go with them, my beloved wife and Saf, please come back." Security guards forcefully took the Indian girl Emily Matthew out of the room and left the patient Deng with his son and mother. The disabled African son Deng shouted angrily at his Abyssinian mother, Ababa Nasir, pointing his finger at her face. "If anything bad happens to my beloved wife in Saf, I will hold you responsible for it." His little son Deng Jr. burst out screaming loudly when he saw his mother being forcibly dragged out of the room. Chapter 56. The London police investigations on the dual identities of Insaf. The hospital security guards tried to find out why the Indian visitor, Emily Matthew, had dual identities. When their investigation did not find a justifiable reason, they reported it. Mrs. Ababa Nasir's complaint to the London police. Shortly after, Emily Matthew was taken to the police station for further investigation on the same day. The British police officer in charge interrogated her and discovered that she was lying about her identity. He asked her to tell him the names of the countries she had traveled to before coming to the United Kingdom. The Sudanese girl in South did not check the visas in her Indian passport, so she could not correctly answer the tricky question. I haven't been to any other country except Sudan and India, Emily answered while crying. Confirming her guilty plea, the police officer said, "You said that you have not visited or seen any other country except Sudan and India." The wife Emily answered honestly and innocently, "Not at all, sir. But this Indian passport you hold shows that you have visited Kuwait, Malaysia, Singapore, and Indonesia." Emily remained silent. The English police officer looked seriously at her face before resuming his speech. "So you are clearly traveling on someone else's passport. You have removed the photo of the real owner of the valid Indian passport and put your photo instead." The suspected Indian, Emily Matthew, responded to the accusation with tears. Then the Sudanese girl in South Salah had Junaid, being exposed, put her head on her lap and began to cry bitterly. "Tell us what your real name and real nationality is." Emily continued to cry. "In that case, we have to detain you for further investigation." That evening, the British police were able to extract part of the truth about Emily's double identity. She admitted that she was traveling on someone else's passport. She also informed the police authorities that she had stolen the passport from the Indian Christian family who had sheltered her for more than a year. She also said that she added her son Deng Jr.'s name to the stolen Indian passport. Then the Arab wife in South tried to justify her action by telling the police that she had not seen her disabled African husband Deng Majok Nasir for a long time. She explained that she was unable to obtain an entry visa to the United Kingdom under her Sudanese passport, bearing her real name is South Salah Junaid, and for this reason she was pushed to steal the passport of the Indian daughter Emily Matthew. The accused Sudanese wife lied because she did not want to get the good Indian mother and her son Mark into trouble with the law. The British police temporarily accepted such a story. In addition, the foreign defendant in South was unable to convince the English police authority of the reason that prompted her to flee from Sudan to India. For this reason, she was detained for further investigation. The first step taken by the British police was to trace her real identity and to find out who Emily Matthew was. Then the London police contacted the Bombay police. The Indian police did not take the matter seriously at first. They only informed Matthew's Christian family of their daughter Emily's stolen Indian passport. Bombay police were unable to identify the accused Sudanese girl until the third day when they learned that the suspected foreign girl in South Salah Junaid had escaped from the drug smuggling trial. Then the British police were notified that the suspected Sudanese girl in South Salah Junaid had escaped from trial. Along with that information, all her criminal records were included in her case and faxed to the police authority in London. She has been identified as a double convict scabby who escaped from Sudan prison and Indian jail. She fled Sudan to India because of her conviction of murder. She was released on bail from a prison in Bombay while still on trial for drug smuggling. She managed to flee India and entered the UK illegally due to her involvement in drug smuggling charges. A few days later, the Indian police informed the British police that in South Salah Junaid had been acquitted of the drug charges. As a result, she does not need to return to India to face further legal charges. The Bombay Criminal Court Authority does not want Insaf to return to India for two reasons. Firstly, the court will lose the amount of 21,000 US dollars that Matthews Matthew's family paid twice in exchange for the bail of the Sudanese accused in South Salah al-Jinnate. Secondly, if the criminal court judges, if the criminal court judge the foreign girl in South and convicts her for escaping from prison, the Indian government will have to feed her and her son in prison for a long time. In a view of this, the Indian Criminal Court in Bombay acquitted the foreign defendant Insaf Salah al-Jinnate of all legal charges against her during her stay in India. In fact, of the 10 defendants charged with drug trafficking, only 2 were convicted by the Bombay Criminal Court. A Sudanese student drug dealer, Christina, was found guilty and sentenced to 11 years with hard labor. The old hunchbacked Afghani man who sold drugs to her was also sentenced to 14 years in prison with hard labor. When the Indian court acquitted the Sudanese accused Insaf Salah al-Jinnate, it informed the British police of her innocence, but revealed her crime for which the Sudanese Criminal Court in Khartoum had convicted her. A short time later, a Sudanese criminal court asked the British police to extradite convicted, escaped prisoner Insaf Salah al-Jinnate as soon as possible to Khartoum to face the penalty of premeditated murder. The British police accepted the request and set a day to hand over the Sudanese girl who escaped from the prison in her motherland. The day was set for her deportation from London to Khartoum to face the penalty of premeditated murder, for which she was convicted in Sudan. Chapter 57. Seeking refugee asylum in the United Kingdom for the detained wife. The Ethiopian mother, Mrs. Ababa Nasir's unfriendly actions towards his Arab wife, Insaf, caused her African son, Deng, to become angry with her. A heated argument between mother and son develops into a family interruption, finally resulting in the angry husband refusing to forgive his mother for persecuting and accusing his beloved wife. Then the Ethiopian mother led her African son to choose between his Arab wife and his parents. The devoted African husband then chose once again to stand by his beloved Arab wife Insaf, despite all the difficulties and family sacrifices. This daring decision led to the mother's acquittal of her son. However, the African son Deng repeatedly told his Ethiopian mother, Ababa, that his Arab wife Insaf had a more noble soul than her. On the other hand, the mother screamed at her son and accused him of being ungrateful for what she and his father had done to save his life after his bad Arab wife had put him in the hands of death and fled to India. Shortly after that family quarrel, the Abyssinian mother, Mrs. Ababa Nasir, left the hospital in a state of extreme anger and went to stay with some of her Ethiopian relatives in London. On the same day, she called her African husband in Sudan and told him about the sudden appearance of the cursed Arab girl who had robbed them of their son again. Mr. Majok Nasir supported his Ethiopian wife's decision and encouraged her to wash her hands of their useless son and return to Sudan without him. The angry father once again swore to God and a divorce of his Abyssinian wife Ababa that he would never again accept his evil son Deng, nor would he allow his cursed Arab wife Insaf to be part of his African family. Although his mother left him and threatened to stop the family's financial support, her disabled son Deng did not think about the serious matter for even a moment. His main worry is how he can save his Arab wife and staff from the security officer before he gets her into serious trouble with British law. When he discovered that the British police had arrested his wife, he placed all the blame on his mother. Then the disabled husband Deng moved his wheelchair and followed his detained wife in South wherever the police authority took her. He was unable to prevent the English police officers from arresting her and taking her from the hospital to the police custody. At the police office, the disabled husband appealed to the British authorities to pardon his Arab wife. All his efforts to free his wife that day were in vain. Late in the evening, the African husband left the police station and went to stay with some South Sudanese friends he knew in London. After that, Deng went to the police every day to inquire about his detained Arab wife. Every day he went, one or two more charges added to his wife's case were reported. The British police prepared a long rap sheet of many charges that included many serious crimes committed by his wife in Sudan and India. In addition to these heinous crimes, Insaf added her charges of forging someone's identity and illegally entering British territory. Finally, the husband was informed that his wife should be extradited to Sudan to face trial and receive due punishment for the premeditated murder for which she was convicted in Khartoum. The British police agreed that the disabled African father could keep his son, Deng Jr., with him. In that desperate situation, the disabled African husband tried everything he thought might prevent his Arab wife from going to the gallows in Khartoum. He went to a lawyer, but was disappointed by the huge amount the lawyer requested. The lawyer also told him that his wife's case might not merit the trial he wanted it to have. Deng then went to the Sudanese embassy in London and asked for its help. His embassy closed its doors in his face. When there was only 1 week left for the Arab wife to be extradited to Sudan, some Sudanese friends in Britain advised their disabled African husband Deng to appeal his detained wife's case by appointing an English lawyer for her or submitting a request for political or religious asylum for her in the United Kingdom through the United Nations office. Deng ruled out the idea of a legal appeal because he does not have any money to hire a lawyer for his detained Arab wife, and he knows that his assumed mother and African father will not spend a single pound to help the Arab girl whom they consider to be the cause of all the misfortunes that befell their only son. Deng also learned that the United Nations office in New Delhi rejected his wife's application for refugee status in India. When his staff spoke to him on the phone while she was in Bombay, she informed him that her application for refugee status in India had been rejected because she was accused of murdering a woman in Sudan. However, the disabled husband insisted that, as a last resort, he had to knock on the door of the United Nations for refugees. Early the next morning, the African husband went to the United Nations office in London. He has to wait for 3 hours outside the building before the office doors open for asylum seekers to submit their applications. He was given a blank sheet of paper and asked to write down his appeal. With a bleeding heart and eyes overflowing with many hot tears, the disabled African husband, Deng Majok Nasser, wrote the following heartbreaking words. Dear Sayer or Dear Madam, in the name of justice, love and mercy, I would like to appeal the case of my innocent detained Sudanese wife in South Salah al-Junaid. My wife and I are victims of a conspiracy hatched against us by the Islamic Sharia court in Khartoum. My wife did nothing wrong to deserve the harsh punishments she faced in Sudan, India, and the UK. The only crime we are believed to have committed is when we fell in love with each other and were legally married. But the Sharia court in Khartoum cancelled our Islamic marriage because I am a Sudanese African and my wife is a Sudanese Arab. This may seem impossible to believe, but unfortunately, it happened to us in our homeland, Sudan. A few months after our halal Islamic marriage, we were invited to appear before the judge of the Sharia court in Khartoum. In the Islamic court, we were told that my father-in-law had filed a complaint against our Islamic marital union. Then the religious judge in the Sharia court canceled our marriage contract based on an Islamic law called the law of insufficiency or inadequacy between the tribe of the Arab wife and the tribe of the African husband. This is because my wife is from an Arab tribe called Shagia, whose ethnic roots go back to the uncle of the Prophet Muhammad al-Abbas. And I am from an African tribe called the Denka, whose origins extend to the Black Zunuj tribes of southern Sudan. Zunuj is a plural of the Arabic name Zungi, which is a racist term, and means a black Negro slave. I had been addressed by that racist name by my father-in-law and the three judges of the Sharia court on the day of our unfair trial, which annulled our marriage. This happened to us even though we are Muslims and believe in the same Holy Quran and the same infallible Prophet Muhammad. May God bless him and grant him peace. However, my Arab wife and I, as her African husband, did not accept such a discriminatory law of Sharia. So we continued to live together as husband and wife. Because of the fear of being punished by the Sharia law, we planned to escape from Sudan to India. On the day we were supposed to fly abroad, two Arab policemen broke into our hut. I told my wife that she should escape from them and travel to India. I chose to sacrifice my life for my wife and our unborn son, who she was carrying in her womb at that time. Somehow, I managed to catch the two policemen until my wife got out of the hut and ran away. She took a taxi to Khartoum International Airport and flew to Bombay City the same day. During my struggle with the two policemen, one of them shot me in the chest. Fortunately, I survived that fatal bullet. When I fully recovered, the police transferred me from the hospital to prison. 2 months later, the Sharia court convicted me of living illegally with my ex-wife and committing adultery with her. Therefore, I was convicted and severely flogged with 100 lashes. I still bear the effects and scars of those brutal blows on my back. Because of this inhumane and brutal punishment, my spinal cord was irreparably damaged, and I became disabled and confined to a wheelchair. I came to London twice for spinal surgery, but could not regain my health. When she was in Sudan, my wife was forced to kill a BIM lady who had kidnapped her, held her captive in her home, and wanted it to force her into prostitution and sexual slavery. My wife did not flee Sudan because she wanted it to avoid the death sentence that the Khartoum Criminal Court had issued against her. She received an official presidential pardon from her death sentence and was released from prison several months before she escaped from Khartoum to Bombay. The Sudanese embassy in India accused my wife of apostasy from Islam and tried to return her to Sudan. During her stay in India, my wife converted of her own free will from Islam to Christianity. For this reason, she was accused of disloyalty to her religion and her country. Accordingly, the Minister of Religious Affairs and Endowments in Sudan lifted the presidential burden from my wife. Since apostasy from Islam is not a criminal offense in India, the legal advisor of Sudanese embassy in New Delhi brought the all premeditated murder charge against my wife and used it as an excuse to send her back to Sudan to be executed as an apostate Muslima. He did this because of her apostasy or conversion from Islam to Christianity. Howbeit, the Sudanese embassy in London lied in its report by informing the British police that my wife was sentenced to life imprisonment of 14 years. The embassy officials knew that if they mentioned that she was going to be hanged to death for her alleged crimes of murder and apostasy, the London police would not extradite her to Sudan because capital punishment is not allowed in the UK. If my wife is extradited to Sudan, she will not be imprisoned for 14 years for murder, but she will be hanged to death for apostasy. As you may know, apostasy from Islam is a major crime in Muslim countries such as Sudan and is considered high treason and hence is punishable by death through hanging. The Prophet Muhammad said, whoever changes his religion, kill him. To escape falling victim to such a conspiracy, my wife was pushed to steal an Indian girl's passport, and through it, she fled from India to United Kingdom. Unfortunately, my wife was betrayed by one of my family members, my mother, Mrs. Ababa Nasr, and she was arrested by the British police. The police of London have been informed by the Sudanese embassy of her former murder crime and planning to return her to Sudan after 1 week. If the British police return my wife to Sudan, she will be convicted of apostasy and executed. The United Nations office in India rejected my wife's application for asylum because its legal advisor was misled by a false report he received from the Sudanese embassy in New Delhi. In this report, the Sudanese embassy officials falsely accused me of attacking the two policemen at the hospital, not in my heart, in a shanty town in the outskirts of Khartoum called Al-Ishaj. They claimed that I planned my wife's escape when they brought her to the hospital for a pregnancy test before executing her. We were not yet married when my wife was accused and convicted of murder by the Khartoum Criminal Court. This information can be confirmed through the legal representative of my wife, a Sudanese lawyer, Haram Khalil. Furthermore, the same attorney can confirm the presidential pardon that was granted to my wife when she was convicted. I have attached to this request the address, phone number, and fax number of attorney Haram Khalil. Finally, I beg you, dear ladies and gentlemen, to view the case of my detained wife with more sympathy. I would also like to remind you that in my country, Sudan, many innocent people like me and my wife have been falsely accused and subjected to a cruel torture for crimes they did not commit, except to demand equal treatment with other citizens. With the utmost respect and reverence, the disabled Sudanese husband Deng Majok Nasser.